Good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday, the 7th of March. On my way to Berea. I'm going to have a busy day. Don't know if I'll have time to record. I wanted to continue my discussion of fields. And in particular, I wanted to talk about intimidation, and I wanted to talk about sort of how you can see energy and magnetism between people. I saw an interesting video. You know, my first love was basketball, not kung fu. And so I still like to watch NBA, Inside the NBA on TNT. I usually watch it, though, with YouTube. And I caught one today that I hadn't seen before. It was a few years ago. And apparently, Charles Barkley, who is a Hall of Famer and an NBA legend, even though he never won a championship, he kind of like made fun of Ernie, who's not an NBA player at all, but he's been on NBA on TNT forever, about his jump shot. And so Ernie got a little flustered and a little hot under the collar. Even post-fact, afterwards, he was still kind of hot about it. And he challenged Chuck to a three-point contest, and he won 10-7. And it was glorious. I mean, he beat an NBA player, an NBA legend. His shot was good. I mean, he wasn't moving quick or nothing. He's old. But he stroked a few, you know. And what I love about it is that Ernie's the kind of man that has the maturity and the dominance, the confidence to be, quote, arrogant and say he could beat an NBA player at a three-point contest. And he controlled all that frustration and irritation, and he converted it into work. So let's talk about, let's briefly talk about arrogance and confidence and lack of self-esteem. Now, I've been frequently called an arrogant or a cocky person or whatever. And the funny thing, I define arrogance as a person who is living in ignorance of their ignorance. And so they're going forward not knowing the laws of the universe, not knowing how things really work underneath the scenes, like what's truly going on, and just kind of cocksure going forward and making a lot of waves for no good reason. Right, so by that definition, once upon a time I was very arrogant. Very arrogant. So, you know, as I've elucidated before, I used to be an atheist, pure scientist, materialist, reductionist. I think, therefore, I am. I actually took it to a whole level beyond Descartes. And in college, and then I finally decided I didn't know what I was talking about. And that's what it takes to break your own arrogance. So now, you know, I have very good confidence, because the confidence isn't in myself. It's in the laws. It's in the sciences. It's in these sages who knew what they were talking about. I mean, one way or another, you got to take everything with a grain of salt. Like, you wouldn't go to Zhuangzi looking for art of war advice, and you wouldn't go to Sun Tzu looking for advice on how to, or Wu Tzu especially, for advice on how to, you know, have a peaceful life. And for those of you who don't know, Wu Tzu was a man who made so many people mad that after the king died, they tried to kill him. So then he ran into the king's chamber, and they shot arrows at him, hit the king, and then all of his enemies were beheaded, even though he was already dead. So he won his final battle after he died. Kind of a classic story. His art of war is a genius. It's pure practicality. It's just like Musashi's Book of the Five Rings. Pure practicality. Now, when a person who is lacking in some self-esteem, or they're frustrated, or they're arrogant and supreme themselves, which means they have an insecurity inside, like there's a hole, there's a weakness there. When they meet a person of total confidence and dominance who is willing to debate, and when there's agreement to dialogue and subsume the other position and agree, and to actually admit that they agree instead of just arguing because of either devil's advocacy or just contrivance, you know, being contrarian. when they meet that kind of person, they're going to feel like they have a lack of self-esteem, and they're not going to necessarily know about it. Which means what? They're going to prejudge so they can buffer away from that person. That's called intimidation. Now, in the NBA, again in basketball, it's not necessarily, this is what I love about martial arts and about basketball or sports in general. It's not necessarily considered an unmanly thing to be intimidated. If I meet a bear in the forest, I should be intimidated. There's an energy field between us. I am the top predator with a gun and with a knife, but I am not the top predator one-on-one versus a bear. And that bear probably knows it, but he also knows that I'm dangerous and I'm an unnecessary risk. That's why you make noise with a bear. You don't run, you don't lay down, you don't play dead. You make a lot of noise. You stand up tall, stand for your place. But if that bear chooses to charge, if that's a female bear and she chooses to charge, I watched a video this morning, Aussie Man Reviews. Go watch it. It's hilarious. Bear beat a tiger. Now, it's true that there was a man who killed a tiger a long time ago. He was also like a massive 6'5" kind of man, 300 and some pounds, and he had a stave with him. And he was drunk, which means he didn't feel pain, right? Wu Sung killed the tiger, and Masoyama could kill bulls, but I'm not those guys. So if I'm intimidated in a forest, that's actually probably a healthy response. Overcoming intimidation is a matter of first gaining your confidence. How do you gain confidence in an environment, in a magnetic field that is repulsing your spirit, whether it's your bloodlust or your own awesomeness? I mean, everybody's got awesomeness. Even the most meek person you've ever met has some form of awesomeness. I knew a woman who was so meek it was even in her name. And she had a form of awesomeness. I watched her reduce a full-grown man to tears. And she used her yin. And she got position. And I had to save his ass. Because she was going to get him kicked out of school. Because he didn't have control of himself. He had no strength inside. And this little, she's probably like 5'2". She intimidated him. And women do intimidate men. Fellas, don't pretend that they don't. Women intimidate men all the time. And so, when that happens, you've got to find where you've overextended your energy, your magnetism. Where have you put your charges? Whether it's your mind or your physical energies outside of yourself, bring them back in. You got to know what you know what you don't know. It helps if you can recognize in the other person too. Now, if they come at you and they make a big stink of it, let's say you're at work and you have a bully at work. It happens. One of the most terrible sexual assault stories that came out last year that I saw was actually one that wasn't Hollywood or politics. It was a case of a man down in Antarctica, which is an isolated place. And these women, he was brutal, and no women and no other men stood up for them. And he just viciously attacked them in their personality, their looks, their intelligence. These are scientists. So that means a lot because their personal identities wrapped up in the science. And he was obviously he was intimidated by women. He didn't know how else to deal with them. Probably went all the way back to grade school when he was probably, rejected enough, or I don't know, he just never came to understand women. So it became a real issue. And that kind of intimidation, dealing with that in situ, in place, where you're at, is not a intellectual science. It is a science of how do you do it practically, and when your heart is pumping. And then that is not all that different than a self-defense situation, except for your life is not at stake, at least immediately. Obviously, cyberbullying has led to kids committing suicide and such. Intimidation is a serious issue. In my head, I can hear Charles Barkley saying that a player is intimidated. He's known for just saying what is on his mind. And he's not saying it's an unmanly thing or a bad thing. I mean, Charles Barkley is notoriously chauvinist. He's from the Deep South. You know, you got to understand the man. But he's not saying intimidation in that way. He's saying intimidated is in the energy of the person who's there is retracting. And when that energy is retracting, that's due to magnetic repulsion. This kind of magnetism is, you don't know about it until you think about it in terms of magnetic attraction. When somebody applies charm, when they develop the substance of charm and they try to put it on, they're trying to magnetically attract people based on frequencies, based on certain vibrations. Their heart is actually attracting them. I saw one of these really interesting, I assume everybody knows about the Kirlian photography. I saw one that was really fascinating. They did one, 2 hands on a plate of people in love. The lines went right to each other. And then I saw one where the man was interested in the woman and she was not interested in him. And his lines kept trying to find a way towards her lines, and hers just kept repulsing it away and going this way. And that says everything about some of those classic trope stories, some of those Shakespearean tragedies, where a young man really wants the attentions and affections of the woman. It's in the Silmarillion. Eol, the Dark Elf's son, who I cannot remember his name, he falls in love with his first cousin who he's never met, because he falls in love with the kingdom of which she's the princess. But being that they're first cousins, she has no interest in him and she's repulsed by him. And the more that he tries to win favor with the king and to win wars and to do his best to be the best, the more repulsed by him she is, and by the murderousness in him. I found that a really fascinating story. It's also a very dark and sad tale. If you haven't read the Silmarillion, definitely do, or get the audiobook. Actually, the voice actor for that is outstanding. He's unbelievable. So, intimidation. When you see someone who is trying to intimidate you, or maybe they are already intimidating you. If they're already intimidating you, just retract all that extra energy that you put outside your body and form a central position. I don't tend to be intimidated by a lot of people, so sometimes it's hard to remember what that would be like. There are on the court, though, on the basketball court, that happens. And then I used to let Master DJ Payne, he doesn't like it when I call him Master Payne. Obviously, I call him that because of the movie. But I used to meet with him just so he could beat me at grappling. He was so good. You know, he started judo at age 6 or 7. He could turn his foot backwards for doing throws, for doing osotogaris. I mean, this man was a true martial artist. Now, he did everything but the Chinese martial arts. He was Japanese martial arts and Jeet Kune Do and all that kind of stuff. But he could punch you so fast, you'd be 4 feet away, you'd never see it coming. You'd be knocked out before you could even defend yourself. And I'll share one story about his friend here in a second. But I used to wrestle DJ Payne just to feel beaten, just to be wrecked. And being wrecked at wrestling thrilled me with the fact that I'm not the best out there. And he had the marvelous ability to put me in holds and positions and know exactly, like he knew right here is where this ankle lock's going to take effect. By the time my body flopped over, boom. Now I could read what he was doing, I couldn't stop him. And he could read everything I was doing and he could stop me. That's the ultimate art of war. And I loved getting beat by him on the mat. It was great. Striking was a whole different thing because I think that he was a little bit kind of like he had to amp everything up and that was unnecessary. But on the ground, he had total confidence. He wasn't worried at all. He didn't even break a sweat. Meanwhile, I was ready to blow chunks, just trying to get my nausea down. And I loved it. His story. He told me about a friend of his, kind of knocked out their teacher. He heard a noise in the middle of the night, and he thought it was a burglar. I don't know why he didn't think, teacher could be up. This is kind of a sad story, actually. And he goes out and he waits for the guy to go by, and he grabs him and he boom, 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 nails him in his chest like 3 times like a machine gun. He hit him so hard there were bruises on his back. He was hospitalized. It's terrible. It was like, oh my God, I was hearing this story. That is too much bloodlust. I hope his friend, I kind of took seriously the amount of violence in his heart, but still it impressed me in terms of, the energy and the amount of power. So these are how martial artists, like real martial artists, they practice some serious methods. But not all the time is dealing with intimidation. In fact, most of the time, dealing with intimidation is not about having all that martial training. It's just about how do you adjust your heart to where you can repulse the monkey. And the first monkey is the intellectual mind. And the human mentality, which tells you, it talks to you. And it'll make up all sorts of evil things about the other person. And often you'll find very religious, very spiritual folks, even very liberal in their heart folks, who make up ridiculous amounts of evil and ascribe it to the other person and cast all sorts of aspersions upon the other. And all that indicates is that there's a part of themselves that they have not unlocked yet, and that they have not opened and truly gone and figured out what is it that's inside of me that is really intimidating me. Because the intimidation first needs a point charge on you and on your singularity, on your heart soul. Bear in mind that the soul and the mind and the spirit are all 3 different things. And of course the soul, actually here we're talking about the ethereal soul, the hun. So when you have any kind of intimidation, I'll admit, so let me give you an example. I'm intimidated about buying a house. I don't honestly know enough about buying houses. I'm intimidated by all sorts of things to do with the mortgage process. That's all due to my ignorance of the process and my ignorance of everything that goes on and the fear that I'll be one of these people it's not going to be a variable loan, but one of these people that get handed a loss. You count on the science, and you deal with it. And if you show up on time, like yesterday, showed up for home inspection, and boom, caught the problems and see the fixes that were going on. I mean, you got to trust the science. If you trust the science, then you can trust yourself, because you're relying on something greater than yourself. You're relying on science, and what does science rely on? Nature. And what does nature rely on? The one. They're all one. It's just we divide them up. If you can have that, you can overcome intimidation. But consider the magnetic lines, the magnetic fields that surround you with people, with situations, between me and the truck in front of me. I mean, the whole reason why we should have space is not just about time, although that's a huge. It's the energy that it creates, the arrangement of energy that it creates. You just don't want to go through the world and instigate things, or sort of invite the universe itself, invite chaos to instigate things, because bear in mind that is still a solution of the quantum set. Cubism is one of the viable solutions for quantum field dynamics. And that's kind of a scary thing. Nobody knows. How does it work? Well, we don't know, and I don't think you can know, because it's chaos. Anyways, I'm going to wrap up this video. I'm almost to the Berea Clinic. I wish you all well on this kind of chilly day. If you're in the Northeast, be safe. And everyone, share this around, especially if you have a friend who's being intimidated by something or someone. Maybe they're being intimidated by a person of the opposite sex. Maybe they're in a difficult situation. And please like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.